Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, January 10th, and we are here. We did lose a little bit of power overnight, but got it back this morning. We are ready to roll for this show. Hopefully, it will stay on throughout this show. And we got to start talking about that Notre Dame Penn State game that went on yesterday. Incredible game, especially that fourth quarter went back and forth. One costly mistake from Drew Aller made the difference, as it probably was in this game. One play, two plays here and there, we're going to make the difference, and that's exactly what we got. And then we'll talk about Penn State in the second segment. We'll get into kind of where they go from here, what 2025 looks like. It could be very promising. We'll definitely come down to those NFL draft decisions, and we'll get into that in the second segment. Then we'll kind of move on to the game tonight, and we'll start talking about Ryan Day. And there's been an interesting idea thrown out there that win or lose, whatever happens in the next couple of games, he should be out the door at Ohio State. Not necessarily they should fire him, but he should walk out the door, and that's something I want to talk about, the pros and cons of that, and my overall take. Then we'll get to some questions around Ohio State, Texas. Obviously, is there any stopping Ohio State? Is a big time question of that. And then we'll talk about the coaching battle. We'll talk about a lot of different things around that game, and then we'll finish it off. We'll do a little bit of a weekend roundup. Got to talk about Carson Beck into the portal. That is the biggest news of the day, and definitely want to make sure that you guys have that on y'all's radar. But a lot of different things coming for you on today's show, as long as that power stays on. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, and we can have fun back and forth. And we got to jump in. We got to start with that Notre Dame game yesterday. Remarkable game from both teams, really. It was all back and forth. A little bit of a slow start, but once that fourth quarter hit, everything went absolutely crazy. But the crazy thing about this game was Notre Dame was favored all the way up until this game, and then it flipped to Penn State. Penn State -1 right when we were going into this game, and a lot of people thought, did they know something? Did the Sharps know something in the betting world? And it turns out they didn't really know anything. It turns out that Notre Dame was able to get the win here, and it's a game that I think a lot of us are going to remember for a while. It was a very, very weird one. It was one that did not follow the normal set of circumstances for normal Notre Dame wins. You know, they usually run the ball, they take the ball away, and they take care of the clock. That didn't really happen in this game. They lost the time of possession, they lost the turnover battle, they lost the rushing battle, and they found a way to win the game. That is really, really impressive. And overall, I mean, the game started, it was all Penn State. They went up 10-0. They had an INT, a field goal, and a touchdown in the first half, which was only 8 drives total. So it was very, very monotonous to get things going. But at the end of the first half is really where I want to zero in on, because that was a huge, huge moment. Riley Leonard takes a huge hit, and he goes out of the game, has a little bit of a concussion, comes back after halftime, obviously, and we'll get to that here in a second. But Steve Angeli comes into the game, 6 for 7, 44 yards, leads them down the field, and they get a field goal. And it doesn't necessarily look like a big deal, but you go from 10 down to 7 down while getting the ball out of halftime. That was a massive drive. It was an absolutely game-changing drive, could be a season-changing drive for Notre Dame, and it was their backup quarterback that came in and led them on it. It was a remarkable game from him, and definitely one that they very, very badly needed. But overall, when you got into the second half, a lot of things changed in a hurry. You had a Riley Leonard touchdown drive, 8 plays, 75 yards, touchdown, a beautiful, beautiful pass to Ainias Williams, who had a great drive, that one, and then it hit a little bit of a lull. We got a little bit stuck with some punts in the third quarter, and then things opened up in the fourth quarter. It went absolutely insane. We had a touchdown from Jeremiah Love to open the fourth quarter. Penn State returned the favor right back, got an immediate pick, and then went right back down to score to take the lead, and then Notre Dame responds, gets the ball back, goes down, scores 24-24, and then you're looking with about a couple minutes left in this game, and you're trying to figure out how is everyone going to go about their business, particularly Penn State. They get the ball back with about a minute left, 45 seconds, something like that. And then Drew Aller makes the mistake. He throws the ball over the middle of the field when he very much shouldn't have. Sounds like he was trying to ground that ball and just kind of aired it just a little bit more than he was expecting. But a pick by Christian Gray was the moment. And it was the bad moment for Drew Aller. It was the great moment for Notre Dame. And then it made way for, it made way for Mitch Jeter to play hero in this game and kick the game winner. Has had a very, very up and down year, but has really turned it on in the CFP and hit the biggest kick of his life yesterday. It was a remarkable game, and that fourth quarter is one that I'm going to remember for quite some time, because it was hard to get a beat on who was winning that game at any given moment. I think you could have picked either one of those teams, and I would have been on board for you. But as for who won this game for Notre Dame, I don't think there was a good answer. I'll be totally honest with you. I think you can look at the box score and you can find guys. Jaden Greathouse had a great game. Riley Leonard in the second half was so much better than he was in the first. I mean, in the first half, 2 for 6, 38 yards and a pick. After that halftime, after he got injured and came back in, 13 for 18, 185 yards, a touchdown and a pick. So remarkable stuff from Riley Leonard in the back half of this game where it really looked like they couldn't get anything going on the ground. They had 2.8 yards per carry in this game, and it was one of those things that we talked about it going into this game, saying the big question for Notre Dame is what will they do if they get down? What will they do if they get down multiple possessions early in this game? Will they panic? Will mistakes start to roll in? And they did early on, but they didn't late. They went down 10-0 early in this game, kind of got sputtered for a little bit, and then you got that one drive at the end of the half. You get the drive coming out of halftime, and then you start rolling. It really becomes Notre Dame's game in a lot of different ways. Penn State was able to respond at different moments, and Drew Aller made some big plays. The offensive line in that run game had a very, very nice day against a very good defensive line for Notre Dame. So Penn State did plenty, really, in all reality. Penn State did plenty to win this game on really both sides of the football. Abdul Carter was an absolute nightmare all day, and frankly, is definitely someone that is going to go maybe a little bit higher in the draft than we thought he was going to go, just declared earlier, or probably last night, but definitely something that we're going to watch going forward. This team is remarkable. This Notre Dame defense didn't necessarily play all that great of football, at least early in this game. They gave up a ton of rushing yards, 4.9 yards per carry for Penn State, and then you looked at the rest of it, and they won the situational moments. They did what they do best, and Penn State went 3 for 11 on third down. They had 5.9 yards per pass with a long of 27, where I think we all knew they were going to have to push the ball downfield. They were going to have to hit one of those shot plays at some point. They were never really able to. So Penn State was given a number of chances in this game. And it's easy to say, they should have sat on the ball late in the game and just gone to overtime. And I understand that take. I think it's one you could battle back and forth on. But the reality is, I don't think it's the worst decision in the world. I think you get one big throw there and things change in a hurry. Now, I will say I think playing for overtime would have been probably the safer way to go about business, but I don't necessarily think it's the worst decision in the world. Just one that you missed the mark yet again. And it's something that we'll talk about in the next segment is going to make a lot of people mad at James Franklin. And that's kind of the other question that I have when it comes to coaching. And not necessarily a huge question, not necessarily to bury Andy Kotelnicki or anything like that, but he called a great game for about 90% of this thing. But I felt like he could have been a little bit more ground and pound football. I felt like he could have gone to Nick Singleton and Katron Allen just over and over and over again, and they would have been able to find enough offense. They would have been able to control the clock and keep on moving with this win. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think it's the craziest decision. It's just you look up at the end of the game, they have 166 on 34 carries, and you're thinking, maybe that should have been up towards 40. Maybe that should have been up towards 45, and then maybe you come out on the right side of this. So a couple of mistakes here and there for Penn State, and we'll talk about a couple of the coaching things when we get to the next segment. But overall, it was just one of those games where Notre Dame found a way to win, Penn State found a way to lose in a lot of different ways. And I think when you look at this Notre Dame team, there's really nothing more to say. They're not perfect. They're not explosive. They're not going to hit you over the head. Now, they did make a couple of explosive pass plays, which was massive in this game. We'll talk about Jaden Greathouse here in a second. But overall, this is just a team that wins, and there's really no other better way to describe it. They have a remarkable coaching staff between Marcus Freeman, Mike Denbrock, and Al Golden. Maybe the best coaching staff that we have left in this thing, almost definitely the best coordinators that we have left in this thing are Mike Denbrock and Al Golden. Both did an incredible job in this game, but overall, Marcus Freeman has built something, and he's built something that's just, they know who they are. They're going to attack you every single down of the game, and they're not going to let you have anything easy. And at the end of the game, when a winning play needs to be made, they're going to make it. So overall, this was a relatively even game. I think you play it 10 times, you're probably getting something close to a 5-5 split between these two teams. I think they're both very good. I think they both had totally deserve to be here, and absolutely Notre Dame deserves to move on to the national title, but just one of those things. You sometimes have a team that it might not be the prettiest thing in the world, it might not hit you over the head, but they win football games, and that is the end-all be-all in this sport, and man, has Marcus Freeman figured that thing out. In his third year, they're going to the national title for the first time since 2012, trying to win their first one since 1988, Remarkable stuff from Marcus Freeman, and the story rolls on. We'll have plenty of time to talk about Notre Dame, so don't worry about that, but how Notre Dame won this game is something that is a little bit hard to figure out. I'll be totally honest with you. You look at the stat sheet, and there's nothing necessarily that jumps out that says, oh, this is why Notre Dame won, because they lost the turnover battle. They lost the rushing battle. They lost a lot of different points in this game that they usually win, but they found a way to get it done. The biggest one to me is Jaden Greathouse. It was remarkable to watch this guy burst onto the scene. Has been one of my favorite wide receivers in that room for a very long time, or at least the last 2 years, and he's been awesome to watch kind of develop in. He got his moment in the sun. 77 catches, 105 yards, 54-yard score. The guy's remarkable, and he's absolutely someone you're going to need to use in a national championship game. He is the only guy, I don't want to say the only guy, but he is one of the main guys on that team that can just physically impose with an Ohio State DB or with a Texas DB. That is how elite he is on the outside, and he really showed what he can do in this game. Definitely a guy you're going to have to continue to unlock in the national title if you're going to want to take home that national title trophy. And then elite play calling and confident play calling from Mike Denbrock and Al Golden was the biggest part to me. There were moments where that defense was getting pushed off the ball in a lot of different ways, but overall, you had so many different things go for you offensively, and you had 2.8 yards per carry. Mike Denbrock still found openings, and Riley Leonard made the plays when they needed to be there, and they got a little bit creative from time to time. So overall, I think you look at this game plan from Notre Dame. You look at what got Notre Dame this win compared to what got Penn State this loss. It comes down to coaching. It comes down to play calling. It comes down to situational football. All of the things that Notre Dame does incredibly well. All the things that have kind of plagued James Franklin and Penn State the last couple of years. So it's just kind of the way that things have gone. And then the last thing is obviously confusing Drew Aller. He was all over the place. Let's just be totally honest. Barely got over 50% completion in this game. Had one of those picks and then had two more that were called back because of penalties. He was all over the place. His feet were never set when he threw a pass, including that last one, and he was just one of those things where he's still a young quarterback. I know he's a guy that's in his second year, playing meaningful football for the second time in a row, and you're thinking, okay, he's finally gotten there. He'll be able to lead us to a win here, but the reality is you go up against that defense at the wrong time, it can get just about anyone, especially a kid that's not quite as comfortable as a lot of the other guys in this country. So overall, it was a Penn State game, and as upsetting as that sounds to a lot of Penn State fans, that's just the reality of this game. You won a lot of the different points of this game. Notre Dame won the scoreboard, and that's the end-all, be-all of this thing. It's remarkable to see what Marcus Freeman has been able to do with this Notre Dame team over the first 3 years, and it's remarkable to see that everything went opposite to the way that Notre Dame likes to win games. They fell down early 10-0. They lost the turnover battle. They ran for 2.8 yards per carry, and they found a way to win. That's just remarkable stuff, and for Penn State, we'll talk about you in the next segment a little bit. I'll give you a little bit of breathing time before we get into a lot of the issues that face Penn State going forward and what 2025 could look like. It can be very promising, and I think there's a lot of really good things to look forward to, but it's the same old story, and you definitely have some reasons to be angry, but we'll break it all down, see what 2025 looked like, look at the schedule and a lot of different things right after this for Penn State, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Notre Dame getting that huge win in the Orange Bowl, moving on to the national title for the first time since 2012, looking for their first national title since all the way back in 1988. But remarkable game from Marcus Freeman, remarkable game from that coaching staff. Let me fix my hair here for a second. Remarkable game from that coaching staff. Did an incredible job with this team all year, and they won a game that on paper it looked like they had no business in winning. And that's what we got to talk about now. Where does Penn State go from here? Because the reality is, it feels all the same, doesn't it? I mean, I'm not a Penn State fan. Maybe some Penn State fans can tell me what they think about this segment afterwards. But at the end of the day, this one hurts. There's really no other way to put it. I mean, it's one of those things where it was there. It was there every single second of that game. There was a moment where you could have taken it. Drew Aller could have made one big throw. You could have broken one big run. You could have gotten one pick. Whatever it was, there was plenty of chances to win this game, and you come out on the wrong side. And now you're looking up and wondering, what does 2025 look like? What does this program look like going forward, not even to 2025, beyond 2025? And I think one of the bigger questions, we'll get to James Franklin here in a second, I can promise you that, but you got to start with Drew Aller. He had an obvious problem in that game. There's no doubt about that. He obviously did not play his best football, was barely over 50% completion, did not do much of anything to really give Penn State a great chance to win that game. The other side of that coin is a wide receiver did not catch a pass in this game for Penn State, and I wish that was a surprise to me. It's a very, very surprising stat overall. When you talk about Penn State, it's not that crazy. These running backs, that tight end, Tyler Warren and Luke Reynolds, are the only guys to speak of when you talk about the game changers on that offense and the guys that can really make plays catching the ball out of the backfield. So there's plenty of time to put blame on Drew Aller. There's plenty of time to critique him and tear him apart and find ways for him to get better. And there's a lot of different ways. His heart rate does have to slow down. His feet have to be a little bit more planted to the ground instead of a little bit all over the place. He just got to be more careful. But on top of all of that, they got to give him guys. You know, it's no disrespect to what Trey Wallace is. It's no disrespect to what Omari Evans can be and all of those guys, but they don't have a game changer at wide receiver. And if you're Penn State and you're trying to compete for a national title, you're not going to do that without a game changer at wide receiver. Even Notre Dame yesterday, they don't necessarily have a quote-unquote game changer. Jaden Greathouse stepped up at the right moment, got over 100 yards and a touchdown, and that was enough. You don't necessarily need a guy that's going to hit you over the head, go for 250 yards and 4 scores in a game. You just need a guy that can make some plays. You just need a guy that you can send downfield and feel confident that he's going to come down with that football. And then you obviously do need to get more from Drew Aller to get him that football in the right situations and make sure that it's on target. So Drew Aller has plenty of things to work on. I think he is an elite talent. I can promise you he is not going into the NFL draft. That's something that was kicked around this week. I can almost promise you he will officially be back in Happy Valley, and I think it's good for him. I think he's a really, really, really talented quarterback. I think he's a guy that can very well go number 1 overall when you come to 2026 NFL draft, but he's got work to do. There's no doubt about that. Every single time that he faces an outright elite defense, he does not look like himself, and that's something that has to change going forward, or this thing is going to get ugly in a hurry. And then you got to talk about the guys that are walking out the program. And we'll get into those guys in a little bit. But Tyler Warren, Abdul Carter, those are the biggest names, no doubt about that. And it's a load to replace this guy, When you talk about that defense, they have so many things going for them. We'll talk about a couple of the guys that could come back here in a second. But this Abdul Carter guy is game-changing in every sense of the word. And they will not have an Abdul Carter on next year's team. No one will. No one has an Abdul Carter right now except for Penn State. So that's the reality. This defense is going to have to be better on the back end. They're going to have to be much better at the linebacker position. That was one that I really highlighted going into this game. I thought that was going to be a huge plus for them. They got taken advantage of in a lot of different ways. Those linebackers, especially in coverage against running backs, they really struggled. So Kobe King needs to take a step up. Tony Rojas, big time, needs to take a step up. Dom DeLuca, all of these guys just need to play better football because that guy walking out the door is like 3 guys walking out the door, and you're going to have to find a way to replace them in the aggregate, as they call it. But a lot of different things to talk about. This guy is the main thing to talk about, and I hate to do it, if I'm being totally honest, because I like James Franklin. I think he's a very good head coach. I think he's someone that absolutely can win a national title. I think he can do it at Penn State. I understand that this doesn't mean anything to Penn State fan because you're 1-15 against top 5 opponents in his tenure. Marcus Freeman has beaten more top 5 teams in the last 8 days than James Franklin has beaten his entire time at Penn State. So I get it. I'm not here to tell you that you're crazy to be mad at James Franklin. I'm not even here to tell you that you're crazy to think that he should be fired. What I am here to tell you is you are not as far away as it feels like. If that kick does not go in and you go to overtime and you win that game, the conversation is totally different, even though a couple of plays just have changed. So that's the reality of this sport. It is so fickle. The ball is so weird. It bounces different directions. And at a certain point, it's going to bounce your way. As crazy as that sounds, as long as this has taken for it to get there, it is going to bounce your way and you're going to get one of these wins. It's just going to take a while, and it's very, very frustrating, and there's things that you very much need to upgrade on to get you closer to that point, but you were really close. That's the reality of the situation. If that kick hooks left, or if Drew Aller actually does ground that ball instead of throwing it to Christian Gray, this game is totally different. The conversation around Penn State is totally different. The conversation around James Franklin is he can really win the big game. He is elevated to another level, not he's never going to get it done. So I understand it. It's another day that you feel like Penn State football. You feel like a team that is right there, but not quite to the elite level of this sport. But the reality is you're not far away. You're a couple of plays, you're a couple of bounces of ball, you're a wide receiver or two away from this thing becoming really, really special. But you do have some questions, and we'll get into those here in a second. Overall, I think Aller's getting there. I don't think he's there right now. I don't think he's a national championship quarterback right now. I think he very well could be next year. And I think you have guys on the defensive side of the ball that if they decide to come back, which is something we'll talk about here in a second, you have something that could be really special next year. Now, it's all too familiar right now, and I totally get that, and it's all too familiar for me to be sitting here saying maybe next year will be different. Maybe next year will be the year that you officially break through, but I'm telling you, this team is not far away. This team is different than the Penn State teams that we have seen in the past because when they walked on that field, I didn't feel like they were going to get pushed around. When they walked on the field with Ohio State, I didn't feel that way. When they walked on the field with Oregon, I didn't feel that way, and that has proven to be true. They're a very tough team. They're a team that is getting better. It's just very, very slowly. It's slower than people want it to, and I fully understand that's frustrating, but I promise you, at some point it's going to break through. At some point he is going to be the guy that breaks through for you, and if he's not, then maybe this time next year you're looking for a new head coach and you get to restart. As upsetting as that is, that's kind of the reality of Penn State football right now. But let's take a quick look forward to what 2025 has in store for them because I think there's some great things that could be in store. And we'll start with a couple of different guys that could possibly make their way back to this team. Now, Tony Rojas is coming back. Deni Dennis Sutton is the guy that I want to talk about because we talked about how Abdul Carter is not a guy that you're going to replace with one guy. You're not. There's no doubt about that. This would be about as close as you're going to get. This is an absolute beast coming off the edge, made a number of plays last night, including that just ridiculous pick that he should not be able to physically make at his stature. But at the end of the day, remarkable player, and you get him back on board, some special things could happen. But you are losing your two best players, plain and simple. You're losing Abdul Carter, you're losing Tyler Warren. I would assume he still does have 1 year. I would assume he's going to the NFL draft. Would be very surprised if he came back to Penn State. But there's a couple other guys to talk about. When you talk about Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, there's been reports that they're coming back. There's been essentially no talk from them as they've gotten ready for these games, but if both those guys come back, you have the most lethal running back duo in the entire country. If a guy like Jalen Reed's a senior, if a couple of these offensive linemen, you're only losing Sal Wormley from that offensive line, great player, but only losing one offensive lineman. Defenders, you have a lot of guys that can come back but might not. A lot of decisions have to be made around State College, and it will have a huge, huge bearing on what that defense especially looks like. But overall, if you get those two running backs coming back, if you get Nick Singleton and Katron Allen coming back, if you get Deni Dennis Sutton coming back to this team, it is going to be a special team next year. And then you just got to hope that Drew Aller takes that step forward that you've been waiting for. Then you got some questions for the offseason. Where do you look forward in? That's kind of the biggest one. Do they run it back? Does that duo come back for one more year? Does Katron Allen and Nick Singleton say, we were on the doorstep, I want a national title, we're going to go after it? If they do, plain and simple, they will absolutely be a national title contender. Now, the issue with that is, some of the question about this is, was this a step forward? That's the other question that I have for this offseason, and something that probably depends on what Penn State fan you ask, because you got to the CFP. You got to the semifinals of the CFP, and we've talked about this. I think it would have worked a little bit differently in the 4-team depending on who got in, but the reality is you got to this point. You got close. But did you really change who you were? Was this one step forward, one step back, or was it 2 steps forward and 1 step back? Because those are 2 very different things, and at least it would be making progress. But that's something you're going to have to figure out from the Penn State fan base, and it's going to be hard to figure out. You never really know how much progress you made until you've officially broken through, and Penn State's still waiting for that moment. So was this anything? Was this just a really cool moment in the sun, and it didn't necessarily change who you are as a program, or was this just a building block towards something more special in the future? And then just get wide receiver help, please. I'm not even a Penn State fan, and it pains me to watch this team not have a wide receiver, catch a pass in the biggest game of their season. You have to figure that out. You absolutely have to figure that out, and there's plenty of guys in the portal to go find. Now, we'll get into that obviously next week. We'll try to get into a couple of the different guys that could be making their way different places. I promise you that James Franklin is on the phone with guys right about now. So there's a lot of different things that have to happen for this team. You're wondering if you took a step forward. You're wondering who's going to come in at wide receiver. You're wondering a lot of things, but let's look forward to the concrete here. Nevada, FIU, Villanova to open your season, you will go 3-0. There's no doubt about that. If you don't go 3-0, then go and scrap the season. We'll move on to 2026 with a new head coach. I can almost imagine. But then you do have Oregon in the regular season, a little bit of a Big Ten championship rematch. You're at Ohio State. You do get Indiana. You're at Iowa. This is a tough schedule. It's not necessarily impossible. You do get a Northwestern team that should be manageable. Nebraska is one that's still up in the air and is up in the air pretty much every single year. Michigan State is one that I'm watching pretty closely. Rutgers as well. So we'll figure out how hard this schedule is. From what it looks right now, I think it's manageable. I think the way you look at it in a normal Penn State season, you'd be looking at this and saying 10-2. Now, if Drew Aller takes that next step forward, if they find those running backs, if those running backs come back, if they find those wide receivers, some special things could happen. But at the end of the day, it does look like another year that it could just be another Penn State year. We'll figure that out in time. Obviously, plenty of time to look into next year for them. But this is it. You're here yet again. The Penn State season ends a little bit earlier than Penn State fans think it would or think it should, and you're anxiously awaiting a number of decisions and where they stand. Obviously, Abdul Carter's out the door. I would fully expect Tyler Warren to be out the door at some point today. And then you got to wait for the rest of the guys. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, all of these guys, if they find their way back to State College, if Drew Aller can take that next step forward, which is a lot of ifs. I fully understand that, and I fully understand that's not the world you want to be living in anymore. You want to be living in concretes. You want to be living in, we are going to Atlanta for a national title. But the criticism will be fair. You can go after this guy. I fully understand it. He has made a number of mistakes, and he made a number of mistakes last night. And it's painful. I totally get that, but I'm telling you, this team is just a little bit different. This team was a little bit different than every other Penn State team that I've seen, not necessarily because they won more games or not necessarily because they broke through that glass ceiling, but because they were just tougher. Every time they got on the field with a Notre Dame, a Ohio State, and Oregon, I didn't shudder. I didn't worry about what they were going to do. I didn't worry about a blowout incoming. I just wondered if Penn State was going to be able to win the football game. So I understand it's not the step that you wanted to take this year. If you're a Penn State fan, I understand it's been remarkably slow progress, and I can't promise that 2025 is going to be a great success, but I can promise you that there are signs pointing towards that. I think Drew Aller can take that next step forward. I think those running backs very well could come back to State College, and I think you're going to have a defense that is going to have talent on it. If it's not going to have the world-breaking talent of Abdul Carter, it has plenty of guys, especially if Denai Dennis Sutton comes back. So, frustrating time for Penn State, no doubt about that. Plenty to look forward to in 2025, and we will break that down in more detail as we go off the next couple of weeks and obviously into the offseason. But frustrating, no doubt about that. We'll see what 2025 holds. Notre Dame, you're on to the national title, and you get to sit pretty for another couple of days, and you get to wait for one of these teams we're about to talk about. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, let's talk about Ryan Day, and let's talk about what his future holds, even if they win a national title. Could he be on the way out of Ohio State? And we'll talk about that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. Keep messing up my hair, apologies. But welcome back everyone. We just talked about Penn State and what does 2025 look like for them? How do they move forward? Some big time decisions happening, especially with that running back duo. We'll see what Penn State looks like. Maybe we'll do a little bit more of an in-depth breakdown once we have all those decisions. But Penn State goes home, Notre Dame moves on to the national title, and they might just face off against Ohio State. And that's the question that I want to ask here for a second. Win or lose? If Ohio State wins or loses tomorrow or the national title, should Ryan Day be the coach of Ohio State going forward? And this is not me necessarily saying that Ohio State should fire him. I think they shouldn't have fired him even if they lost to Tennessee, frankly, if I'm being totally honest. But the question is, would he leave? That's something that Dennis Dodd over at CBS kind of posed. They put out a story that was kind of just looking at this. Should he go after it? And it sounds crazy. I fully understand that. But you look at some of the wild things that he's had to deal with the last couple of years, the last couple of weeks when he was getting ready for that CFP. It's not the craziest thing in the world. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. First, let's get into some reasons why he would leave, why he would walk out the door, and why it might not be worth it to stick around in Ohio State, even if you walk out a national champion. And this is the biggest one. Constant and sometimes unfair criticism. Now, we can talk about what's fair or what's unfair till the cows come home. There are a million different ways to look at that. I think when you look at Ryan Day, a lot of it is fair. You know, you got to beat Michigan. You just have to. You can't go to Ohio State. You can't be the head coach and lose to Michigan. That's the reality of this job. That's the reality of that position. And he's lost 4 years in a row. So fully deserves that criticism. I'm not here to tell you that he doesn't. I'm not here to necessarily protect Ryan Day in any respect, but what I am here to do is say he's a fantastic head coach. He has gotten to the mountaintop way more times than basically every other head coach in the entire country. If you want to put his accolades up against just about any other head coach in the country, you're going to be really, really hard-pressed to put him anywhere below 5. The guy is really, really remarkable. He's made mistakes. There's no doubt about that. He's had bad moments, and he's missed moments that Ohio State is used to getting. There's no doubt about that, but he's dealt with a lot. He's dealt with a lot of criticism, and some criticism that I don't think even us could understand. I don't think even us could fathom, and I promise none of us could really handle in all of this craziness and then coach a national championship team. So the reality of this is the goals for an Ohio State head coach are beat Michigan, get to a title, or excuse me, beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and get to a national championship. That is the goal at all times, forever at Ohio State. He has not been able to do all those in 1 year, and that's really kind of the end-all be-all. Now, when you take a step back and look at his resume, he's gotten to a national title. He's won the Big Ten in the past. He's had Heisman finalists. He's won essentially 11 games every single year. You just can't win that one. So you can call it unfair. I kind of waver back and forth. I think a lot of it is unfair. I think some of the Michigan stuff is relatively fair at the end of the day because he knew that coming in, that was the game that he had to win. He has not won it nearly enough as he should. So that is obviously part of this. Definitely some, at times, unfair criticism could be a way of pushing him out the door. And then the college job rigor, it is a nightmare being a college football head coach right now. All due respect, it's incredible what these coaches can do every single year because we just talked about the month of December. We've talked about it a lot on here and how it's an absolute nightmare. Ryan Day's had to deal with that the last couple of years. Ryan Day's had to, jump around and get guys in the portal while getting ready for a playoff game, while getting ready for a new class coming into the door and all of these different things. That's something that's pushing a lot of guys out of the sport. We saw Jeff Hafley just leave Boston College for the defensive coordinator job over at the Packers. It was because he wasn't in on this sport much longer. It was because he was tired. It was because it was just a little bit too much. And as crazy as it sounds, NFL head coaches have an easier job than college football head coaches because they get to spend less time at the office. They get to have a life outside of the office, and Ryan Day hasn't really been able to do that the last 10 years of his life. He's been all over the place, been flying around, especially at that school. It's been a lot to do. So this is a very real thing. This is something that has pushed a lot of coaches out of it before. The state of the sport has pushed coaches out of it. But overall, it's less hours in the NFL. It's less responsibilities. It's less people to manage. And maybe most importantly, it's less managers. You're answering to the GM. You're answering to the owner. You're not answering to 150, 200, 1,000 boosters that are always in your ear, and they always want something different, and it's an absolute nightmare to deal with. So this would be another thing that could possibly push him out the door, is just this job is really, really hard, and the one up there at the NFL, for some reason, tends to be a little bit easier for these people to put their to wrap their heads around and definitely to handle on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, this is another huge one. The national championship might not be enough. When you look at what this team is capable of doing, if they go tonight and blow out Texas by 21 points, and then they go forward and beat Notre Dame by 14, win a national championship, Ryan Day standing on that stadium, lifting the trophy, and every Ohio State fan in the country, around the country, is saying, wow, that's awesome. We love that we won a national championship. But you still got to beat Michigan. That's the reality of that position. It's the reality of college football in a lot of different ways, but especially at the Ohio State position, especially at the Michigan position. You know, if Jim Harbaugh came up with a national title last year but hadn't beaten Ohio State in 5 years, Michigan fans would be saying the same thing. That is the reality of the job that he has, and it's a nightmare. The dude is at the very pinnacle of his job. He's at the very pinnacle of this sport. And then he's got to look down and people are going to ask him what happened a couple of weeks ago. Why did you lose to Michigan? What are you going to do to fix that Michigan game? How are you going to get over that hump? A million questions that have nothing to do with what should be and what is probably the best professional moment of his life. So you look around and you look at what Ryan Day can do. If he wins the next 2 games, he can win a national trophy. He can win his very first in Ohio State's first since 2014. And then he'll be looking on Twitter the next day, or his kids will be looking on Twitter the next day, and they'll see someone say, yeah, but he hasn't beat Michigan in 4 years. He better do that or I don't care. That's the reality of the Ohio State program. That's the reality of that fan base, and it's a nightmare to deal with, one way or the other. So the national championship would be great, and I think Ohio State fans would be very, very happy about it. They would also have Michigan fans in their ear saying, well, I guess that's another national championship for us because we beat y'all. So it's a battle. It's one of those things where he could be lifting the national championship trophy, and then people would still be worrying about that game back in November that they lost. So that's another piece of this, that he might want to leave just because maybe it will never be enough. Maybe it will never be what the Ohio State fans want, and especially if you don't beat Michigan, I don't think it'll ever be what they want it to be. But a couple of reasons that he would leave are those. A couple of reasons he'd stay. The legacy is still very much in front of this guy. When you talk about Ryan Day, he's been in this business for quite some time, almost a decade at this point. He's 45 years old. He is not very old. He is not 60. He is not 70. He is not wrapping it up anytime soon. He has probably another 25, maybe 30 years in this sport. He is going to be around for a very long time. It could be at Ohio State for the rest of his time there, and that's the reality, because I'm not suggesting that Ryan Day is going to jump Nick Saban when you talk about his career accolades or he's going to do anything crazy in this sport. Not necessarily saying that, but I am saying if he goes on to win a national title in a couple of weeks, if he wins the next 2 games, wins his first national title, they come back next year and they beat Michigan and then go on and at least get close to another national title, we could be seeing something special start. The reality of Ryan Day is, I understand there's been a lot in his past. There is still a lot more in his future. There is so much stuff that he's capable of doing at Ohio State and maybe some other places that we can talk about. Definitely the NFL is an option, and definitely some different things that we can poke around, especially if they lose tonight. But overall, a lot of different things that would be a reason to stay. I think the biggest one is he can still very well be the best coach in Ohio State history. As crazy as that sounds, it's been a hard start to his career, but the reality is he has plenty of time still to go, and if he wins a national championship this time around, it might be a hard train to stop. Then the payday is better in college, and I apologize for putting Jim Harbaugh on this one, but the reality is, this is the reality of the sport. College does have a better payday for the vast majority of coaches. There are only 5 NFL coaches that pay more than what UGA pays Kirby Smart. All 5 of those head coaches have either coached in or won a Super Bowl. That's kind of the reality. You are not going to get paid top dollar in the NFL if you do not have those accolades. Ryan Day obviously does not have those accolades. So he'd probably have to take a pay cut, plain and simple. He'd probably have to take a pay cut from, I believe he makes somewhere around 9.5, maybe 10 million right now. He'd probably have to take a pay cut down to 8 million. And frankly, not much of a pay cut if you're speaking from where I'm sitting right now. But at the end of the day, if Ryan Day does leave, it's likely going to be for the NFL. I really don't see another college job that is big enough and has enough stature and would be worthy of his time in a lot of respects. So he's going to have to take a pay cut. If he does want to leave this job this upcoming cycle, if he does want to go coach the Bears with Caleb Williams or go coach someone else, go coach the Raiders over there and get a quarterback for them, whatever that looks like, it's going to have to be a pay cut. I can almost promise you that. I mean, even Jim Harbaugh, he got a little bit more money going to the Chargers, but Michigan had an offer on the table that was even more money than the Chargers offered. So it is always the case. It will be the case if Ryan Day moves up. Definitely something to think about and a big reason to stay where you are. And then this, and it's hard to kind of contextualize this in a lot of different ways, but the breakthrough moment is going to be so sweet for this guy. He has really just gotten raked over the coals for being a top 5 head coach in the sport. Plain and simple. That's the reality of the situation, where he has been raked over the coals for losing that one game a year. But the reality is, you look around the sport, you are not going to find 5 coaches better than Ryan Day. He is downright elite. He is a guy that absolutely can get his team to a national title. And the second that he does, the second that he wins a national title, the second that he beats Michigan for another time, the second he does all of that stuff, it's going to be a great moment for this guy. And he's going to be able to say that I'm an Ohio State legend for a number of different reasons. And I understand he's really struggled the last little bit, and he's dealt with a lot of stuff that is both fair and unfair all at the same time. But that moment when he is able to fully break through and become one of the premier head coaches in the sport, become a national championship winner, that's going to be a moment that is unlike any other. Maybe you'll have it in a couple of weeks, but as we talked about, then the Michigan stuff will be brought back up. So hopefully you'll have it at some point, and when it does come, it's going to be a beautiful moment. But overall, my take about this, Ryan Day has been unfairly criticized at times. He's been fairly criticized at other times. He's made mistakes. He's also had games where he didn't make a lot of mistakes and they just came out on the wrong side. Like that UGA Ohio State game back in the day definitely was one where he made a lot of great calls. That kick just hooked left, or hooked right, or hooked left. I'm all out of whack. But the reality is, he's a very, very good coach. I understand being upset, and I understand that he is upset. He is very much coaching mad right now. I can see it on his face. I think everyone can see it on his face that he's a little bit different than he's been in the past. And I don't know if that's if I'm going out of here, I'm going out swinging type of thing, or that's I'm changing things. I am totally different, and I'm going to attack every single day for the rest of the time I have this job. So as a college football fan, I want Ryan Day in this sport, no doubt about it. Regardless if he loses by 25 tonight or he wins by 25, I want this guy in the sport for as long as he really can be. He is a great, great coach. He is a great ambassador for this sport, and most importantly, he seems to be a great man that cares about his players. And that's the type of person you need in this sport more often. That is the person that Ryan Day is, and he's hugely important. He is someone that I really, really appreciate, I really like, and I definitely think we'll stay, I hope at least, we'll stay in the sport. To me, it's not really my place to really give a outright opinion. If I were him, I would stay put. I think his time at Ohio State can be downright special. I think he can be the best coach to ever walk around there in about 10 years if he just keeps his head down, finds his way to win a couple of those Michigan games, and gets on the mountaintop a couple of times. I know that's a tall order, don't get me wrong, but I really do think there's a moment where we could look back in 20 years and say, remember how ridiculous it was that we thought Ryan Day couldn't win the big one? Now he's won 4, and he's one of the best coaches in the country, and he's tearing up the sport. All of that still exists for Ryan Day. So I would very much like him in college football. That is the one thing I can say with absolute confidence. I know he is good enough to win a national title, even though he hasn't already. Overall, if he does walk out the door, all I'm going to do is tip my cap and say goodbye. That's the reality of this situation. He's a fantastic head coach that has dealt with more than a lot of these head coaches remotely deserve to deal with. So it's a question that's worth asking, no doubt about that. And it's something that I think a lot of people behind the scenes are wondering, does Ryan Day say, I can't deal with this anymore, and I'm going to go find my way to the NFL as a coordinator, as a head coach, what have you. I'm going to find a way out of this sport because it's just too much every single day. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I do think he'll be at Ohio State going forward, but it is something to think about. It's been a lot on his shoulders the last 2 years, and it's absolutely something that will wear down on you regardless of who you are. So we'll talk about it in time. Maybe we'll know about this by the time we meet on Monday, but overall, I expect him to be there in 2025. It is something to be on the lookout for, no doubt about that. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, let's get back into the present. Let's stop focusing on hypotheticals here for a second. Let's get into some questions going on tonight about Ohio State and Texas. We'll get into, can Texas even stop Ohio State even if they wanted to, and a lot of different things right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Ryan Day and if he should leave Ohio State regardless of the results of the next 2 games. Should he just walk out the door and say, I'm done with this. I'm going to move on to the NFL, get a coordinating job, and live out the rest of his days away from Ohio State. I hope that does not happen. Really like Ryan Day, would love for him to be in the sport, but definitely something that we're going to be on the lookout for, especially if they lose tonight. It is something that a lot of people will be talking about. But let's get into some Cotton Bowl questions because there's a whole lot of them. There's a lot of different things that we haven't quite touched on the way that I want to as we go into this game, so figured I'd take the chance here and definitely give you guys an idea of a couple of different things I'm watching for tonight. And one of the biggest questions has been the question that Oregon and Tennessee were asking going in. Is there any stopping this Ohio State team? Is there any stopping what they are doing right now? Because the reality is, it looks like there isn't. It is an absolute nightmare to deal with this team right about now. And I think when you look at Ohio State, there's so many things that they do so well that if you're a defense, you can't just key in on the pass. You can't just key in on the run. You can't just hope that Will Howard's going to give you one. He hasn't given anyone one. He's been incredible in these last 2 games. And to give you an idea of how insane it's actually been, Oregon and Tennessee both ranked top 15 in yards allowed per game, both under 300 yards per game allowed. Ohio State went for 473 against Tennessee, 500 against Oregon. Just ridiculous efficiency from this offense. And Texas, 3rd in the country in yards allowed per game, so a tick above those other 2, but will that be enough? I don't think any of us really know if anything will really be enough to stop Jeremiah Smith, to stop Emeka Egbuka, to stop what Will Howard's doing, throwing the ball around the football field. So overall, it's one of those teams, man. It's one of those teams where you know that if you go into a game with them and they play their A-plus football, you're probably not going to come out on the right side of it. Even a Texas team that has one of the best defenses in the country, maybe only second to the team they're playing on the other side tonight. But overall, Texas does have a shot here. There is a world where Texas is able to put together a performance, and that offense really starts to click. Quinn Ewers starts to put things together, and things go very smoothly. But the bigger part of that is if Ohio State plays A-plus football, it's going to be remarkably hard for this Texas offense to keep up, just plain and simple. If this Texas defense can play a little bit better football against this Ohio State offense, maybe you can knock them down to a B+, a B-, and keep yourself in this game long enough to where maybe it's just a couple of plays down the stretch of this game. So overall, I think if they're playing A-plus football, it's going to be darn hard to stop this team. I'll put it that way. But I do think there is a moment where maybe Texas can make that one big play. Maybe Ohio State gets a little bit more nervous than they have been in the first couple of games, and then maybe things can spiral from there. But the reality is, if they play with that efficiency level at that level and Will Howard is throwing at that level, call it. That's your national championship, and we'll move on forward. But this is going to be the toughest challenge they've had pretty much all season, and we'll see if Texas can do any stopping of Ohio State. On the other side of this, if Texas clicks, what could they do? What could they do to possibly match what Ohio State has? Because you're looking around all of the teams in the country, and there are a lot of teams that could possibly match them when you talk about offensive efficiency. You know, Oregon has the ability to do that at different moments. I guess Miami would have the ability to do that, but I think their defense would give up 100 points against this Ohio State team. But overall, you look at what this Texas team can do. They lead the country in 40-plus yard plays. They lead the country in 20-plus yard plays. They can be explosive, and they can be a team that, if it all clicks, if it gets together and Quinn Ewers isn't making some of those boneheaded mistakes, Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond are making plays after the catch, I think you have an opening here. I don't necessarily think you're going to score 45 points on this defense or do anything crazy, but at the very least, you have an ability to keep this defense on the field and make life really tough for them and get them out into open field with one-on-one coverage. And then maybe you make a couple of guys miss. The reality of this Texas offense is maybe it won't look pretty all the way throughout this night, but they can hit those big plays. They can hit those game-changing plays, those one-play games where, we saw it against Arizona State. The first touchdown was a 2-play drive where they threw for 60 yards and then a 32-yard touchdown. That is what they're capable of. They absolutely have that in their bag. So they're down 7 late in this game. They still have that explosivity factor. They still have all of that. So maybe it isn't that they have to outright click. Maybe it isn't that Quinn Ewers has to complete 80% of his passes and throw for 300 yards and 4 scores. Maybe they just have to hit those big plays, and maybe then their defense can give them a number of shots. We talked about it yesterday. Their defense will give them shots in this game. Whether it's early or late, I don't know, because that was kind of the issue with the Arizona State game. They gave them plenty of chances early. Texas couldn't capitalize, and then Arizona State came back in because that defense was on the field over and over and over again. So there's a lot of different questions about this. This is not something I'm banking on. When you talk about the Texas offense, it's hard to see them really click right now. But I do think there is a moment. If they fire on all cylinders, I think we could be looking at that Ohio State UGA game back in 2021. We could be looking at a game where 2 quarterbacks walk out of that thing and it's just who had the ball last, who made that one play, and in that case, it was Stetson Bennett. In this case, it might be Will Howard or Quinn Ewers, and we'll have to figure out tonight. And then the question about Will Howard is, can he shake that 0-4 record against Texas? Because that's the reality of his time in college football. He has been here for quite some time. He's played at Kansas State for the entirety of his time before Ohio State. He has come up short against Texas a number of times during that, and most recently lost in overtime, and Texas kind of kept those CFP hopes alive. Was a ridiculous game over there in Austin. Absolutely was one that leaves a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth if you're Will Howard. So a little bit extra motivation going into this one, no doubt about that, and he would love to make that 1-4 instead of 0-5. But it's going to be awesome to watch this kind of unfold. It's going to be interesting to see what he can do and how much energy he has going into this one. Obviously, him on Kansas State compared to him on Ohio State are two very different things. He has many more toys to play with over at Ohio State, but at the end of the day, most importantly, you just got to make sure that you get over that thing that we've talked about with Ohio State just a little bit. That you see that Longhorn logo, maybe it hurts Will Howard just a little bit. He's got to be able to get past that, move past that, and handle business the rest of the way. But a couple of questions here. I'll be honest, Anthony, I really don't think so. And I fully understand why people are pushing for them to move on from James Franklin, possibly, this year, or at least put him in a bad position going into 2025, what have you. I don't know, man. The way I look at that game last night is, yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he definitely did some things that put his team in some bad spots, but it's hard to deny that they were inches away from a national title. If they win that game, if that kick goes wide and they go to overtime and find a way to win, we're talking about it entirely differently. So overall, that's for Penn State decision to make. If I'm the one making the decision, I say, I don't think you're finding a better head coach this time around than you would have with James Franklin. Can't confirm that, obviously. Maybe there's a guy out there that I'm not thinking of that would be interested in that position, but I don't know. I fully understand the frustration around those big-time games for James Franklin and something that he very much does have to figure out. But the way that I look at it is, you can fire him right now. I can't promise that you're going to have a better head coach next year around, and I can't promise that it's going to get any better than it is right now if you're Penn State. This is another question, and one that a lot of people are going to go back and forth on, but not necessarily because everyone thinks these two head coaches are elite in any respect. I think a lot of people are going after each other just because they don't believe in these two head coaches. I'll just be totally honest with you. Sark is obviously a remarkable play caller, has been caught up at times with different, getting a little too conservative, maybe getting a little too aggressive at times, but overall, he dials up things about as good as anyone in the country, and he's got his work cut out for him against a guy like Jim Knowles. And then Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, they got their work cut out for him as well. This Texas defense does not give you a lot of openings. They play much more zone than Tennessee and Oregon do, so going to make it a little bit harder to get those big explosive plays down the field, but it's going to be a good one. Both head coaches, both OCs, both DCs, all veteran, all smart. I might give the slight advantage to Ohio State just because of that experience factor that they do have with Chip Kelly, with Jim Knowles, with Ryan Day, but overall, both elite coaching staffs and definitely among the top 4 in the entire country. And Anthony, I talked about that earlier. I probably would have kneeled it and gone to overtime. Maybe it's revisionist history for me. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it in the past and saying, obviously, they should have gone to overtime. I probably would have, but I don't necessarily blame him for going for it. I think when you look at what Drew Aller can do with his arm, obviously wasn't quite last night, but you get one big pass there, you get one big run, and then I think things change in a hurry. And Anthony, frankly, they might just have to triple Jeremiah Smith if they want to win this game. I talked about that yesterday. I could see them doing a cornerback 2 safety type double coverage and then putting the number 1 corner on Emeka Egbuka. A couple of different ways to go about business, and that will be a very interesting thing to watch tonight. But the other thing is special teams going to be the decider in this game. And if it is, Texas is not coming out on the right side. I'll be totally honest. Ohio State, Jaden Fielding has played really, really well throughout this year. Had a little bit of a tough moment in the first game against Tennessee, but really played well against Oregon. Absolutely tears balls. They do a really, really good job. On the other side, Bert Auburn obviously missed 2 chances to win that Arizona State game, and there's questions around that kicker position right now. Sark has not committed to a kicker for this game. It sounds like Will Stone was working with the first team early on this week. It sounds like Bert Auburn was working with them late this week, so it's gone back and forth. It'll be very interesting to see who goes out there for the first one, and if it's Bert Auburn, every Texas fan around the country will be holding their breath as he gets ready for that kick. But Ohio State looks stable. Texas looks all over the place. Now, Texas did have that return from Silas Bolden on the punt return, so maybe the kicking won't be the greatest thing in the world, but maybe the return teams can make up for that difference in the special teams category. But as we know, in so many of these games that come down to the wire are very, very close, very talented players. Sometimes it's the special teamers that make things happen. Sometimes it's those guys that really make the difference in these games, and it'll be really interesting to see if they can do that tonight. But let's see what Anthony says here. Yeah, and Anthony, you absolutely did call it. There's no doubt about that. The special teams for Texas has been a downright problem throughout this year, and we'll see if it's a big-time problem tonight. Maybe he'll do a little Mitch Jeter impression and just turn a corner at the right moment for Texas, if I'm being honest. But at the end of the day, will be very interesting to watch and definitely will play a big part in this game. But the other question is this the pseudo-national championship? And I gotta be honest, I don't necessarily love this question. Just overall, overarching, anytime you use this, I don't necessarily love it. That being said, there is this conversation going on. You know, I saw a million tweets saying, whoever wins the Cotton Bowl, you're the national champion. Congratulations, something we've talked about a couple of times on here, and it absolutely is something that will be the sentiment after this game. Whoever wins it will be dubbed kind of as the national champion going forward. Now, Texas might be a little bit different because them and Notre Dame a little bit closer aligned, but if Ohio State rolls in this game, they're absolutely being crowned the national champion before they've played it. Now, that being said, I do think these are the 2 best teams in the semifinals. I tend to believe that Ohio State and Texas are a little bit better than Notre Dame and Penn State. That being said, I've been wrong 10 ways from Tuesday when you talk about this season. I've been wrong about so many different teams. I've been wrong about the SEC compared to the Big Ten. I've been wrong about a lot of things. So the reality is, if I've learned one thing throughout this year, it's lace them up, put the ball down, and let's see what happens. So I'm not going to say it. I do think there are moments where you could say it. I do think there are moments where possibly if Texas wins this one by 3 points and then goes and blows out Notre Dame, then maybe we can have that conversation. But as of right now, Notre Dame has earned their right to be in the national championship. They are playing in the real national championship, so who cares what the pseudo one is. But it is going to be an incredible game over there in Dallas tonight. Cannot wait for that one to get underway, and we'll do a couple of final words at the very end of the show. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we got a little bit of a weekend roundup. We got a couple of different things to get to. The biggest one is Carson Beck is in the portal, something that I didn't fully expect to happen, something that Anthony might be very excited about, and we'll talk about here in a second, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some questions going into that Ohio State-Texas game. One of the big ones going around is this the pseudo-national championship? Whoever wins this one, are they going on to win the national championship? Obviously something that we can talk about in a later date. Definitely something that will be very interesting to watch tonight. But let's do a little bit of a weekend wrap-up. We got a lot of different things that have happened around the world, a lot of coaching carousel stuff that I want to make sure I have on y'all's radar, but we got to start with the biggest news, and it broke last night, got me scrambling just a little bit for this show, but Carson Beck is officially into the transfer portal, and that is something that I didn't fully expect. I'll be totally honest with you. I probably should have expected it a little bit more than I was, but that UCL injury seems to have played a big part in this. He is not going to be 100% by the time you get to combine workouts and all of that different type of stuff. That was the place where I really thought he could kind of separate, where I really thought he could possibly find his way up into that quarterback 3 spot or quarterback 4 spot and really put himself in a great spot going into the draft. Doesn't sound like that was going to happen. Sounds like his draft grades were not all that great. Sounds like there were a lot of questions about that injury going forward and what would that look like going into 2025. So he has decided to come back. He is entering the transfer portal. It sounds like him and Georgia kind of mutually decided to do this. It doesn't sound like one pushed one out the door or Carson Beck just left them hang high and dry. It sounds like both of them felt like this was the best time to do it. I think Gunnar Stockton showed Georgia plenty in that game to where they're ready to move on to him. I think Carson Beck said, I'm probably ready to find somewhere else to play, kind of find a little bit of a new system, and it worked out for both parties. But it is fascinating to me, no doubt about that, and I think the big-time question here is how close to 100% will he be on August 30th, regardless of where he ends up, and we'll talk about the finalists here in a second, but regardless of where he ends up, how close to 100% will he be? He'll start throwing in March, he'll be ready for summer camp, he'll be ready for fall camp, obviously, but there is that moment where you do worry, how long does this really take for him to get all the way back to where he needs to be, and what are the teams that are really going after him for aggressive NIL deals to get him on the team for 2025? Well, there are 3 that have really kind of separated from the pack, and one is the one you're going to really want to watch. And Miami, Texas Tech, and Ohio State are the ones that are really kind of the 3 that you're going to want to watch in this one. Miami is the team. Let's just be totally honest. That is the team that you're going to want to watch very, very closely. His girlfriend plays basketball there. Makes total sense. Absolutely something that would make total sense for me. Texas Tech is one that I think they're going to attack really aggressively. I don't necessarily think they're going to win this one, but I know that Joey McGuire in that group is being very, very aggressive in the portal, and this would be the guy to tie it all together. If they get him, then they could very well be a Big 12 contender this time around. And then you look at Ohio State team that I think if he's looking for the NFL draft, throwing to Jeremiah Smith is not a bad idea by any means. So I think he has 3 really good options. And I think possibly even, a Notre Dame team, a Michigan team, depending on the way they look at their quarterback position. Now, Michigan, I tend to believe, is just going to roll the dice and say, we'll live with whatever Bryce Underwood gives us this year. We'll be great in 2026. But definitely something that is something to think about. But overall, I do think when you look at those 3 teams, I don't think you can go wrong, and I think you can get different things from all those different places. Obviously, Miami, he'll have that connection to his girlfriend there, but also he'll be able to play some great football. Under Shannon Dawson, hopefully that offensive line gets that touch better and plays a little bit better, but overall, very talented kid from the state of Florida, as he just said, and played in American Heritage, as he just said. So a lot of different things kind of tying him to that area would make the most sense to me. I think Ohio State is another one that's in there, but frankly, I'd be very surprised if it wasn't Miami at this point. And I think him and Shannon Dawson fit together very, very well. I think the biggest thing is that offensive line does have to be a little bit better. When it comes to pass protection, that is the biggest thing for Carson Beck. If you can keep him clean, he can be the best quarterback in the country. If people get after him pretty quickly, some things can fall off pretty quickly. That's what happened in the middle of the year. The offensive line got injured. He got more pressure on him and made some mistakes. Then they got healthy, and he started ripping the ball around. So very talented kid. He is the guy that, among the group of guys that are going in, and we've talked about Jalen Milroe maybe not being able to elevate his stock the amount that he would want if he were to come back for another year. Quinn Ewers is another one we talked about that. We'll talk about that, we'll talk about that right now. This is the question that I have now going into Quinn Ewers. If they were to lose tonight, we know now that these NIL deals are out there. We know now that people are willing to go after a Carson Beck, go after a Quinn Ewers, and try to pull them to a different school. Now, Miami would be knocked off the list for Quinn Ewers going forward, if I had to imagine, with Carson Beck heading that way. But at the end of the day, there's still Notre Dame, there's still Oregon, there's still Ohio State, there's still some teams out there that hypothetically would be willing. Ohio State has let you know that they are willing to go out and get a quarterback. They might not feel overly great about where they find. But overall, I do think there are different moments for both these quarterbacks. And I think if you ask me right now, I would say Quinn Ewers is still going into the NFL draft. I think this actually, him coming back, opens the door a little bit more for Quinn Ewers. That being said, it does show that these quarterbacks can make this decision, and sometimes those financials are a little bit better at the college level than they would be at the NFL level. And that's an interesting question, Anthony. I tend to believe it's Carson Beck. Now, I could go back and forth on that. They're relatively similar quarterbacks, but when I look at Carson Beck's ability to extend plays just a little bit more than Quinn Ewers, and when I look at his ability to just be very accurate, go through his progressions, make the right read, I would lean towards Carson Beck. Now, I could be, I think it's a little bit of a toss-up because the reality is I do think Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck are relatively similar quarterbacks, but when I look at the processing speed of Carson Beck, it's just a little bit better. His footwork is a little bit better, and that's why I lean his direction. So maybe it's not even a scheme-based thing. Maybe it's just I lean Carson Beck over Quinn Ewers type thing, but definitely two guys that would do a lot of great things in that offense, but Shannon Dawson would have to be a little bit more proactive than he was with Cam Ward, because the reality is Cam Ward made a lot of not so great play calls and look incredible with a couple of incredible plays. So a lot of different things going into that, and definitely something to watch. But I expect him to end up in Miami. I expect it to happen within the next week, and then we'll see what happens with Quinn Ewers. I still am leaning towards the NFL draft, but definitely a little bit more question in my voice as I say that right now. Coaching carousel interest. Bill Belichick's already got NFL interest, and if you're a UNC fan, just go ahead and strap in and understand that that's going to happen, because the reality is this is going to happen every single day that he is your head coach until he finds his way back to the NFL, and he's going to find his way back to the NFL. I really like Bill Belichick. I really love that he's in the college football world, and I think it's going to be awesome to watch that thing unfold, but this is the reality of who you hired. He is going to be attacked every which way, every single offseason to take every single NFL head coaching job. At a certain point, he is going to take one. So I don't know when that is. I don't know. I tend to believe he will be with UNC to start the 2025 year. I can't say the same thing about 2026. Frankly, if I was leaning towards one right now, I'd lean that he's back in the NFL by that time. But I can't say that with absolute confidence. He is actually building out a staff right now. He's up in New Jersey recruiting right now, which was some interesting photos to see Bill Belichick out there recruiting. But at the end of the day, another hire he's looking to make is possibly the head coach of the IMG Academy, remarkable high school program, Billy Miller. He's thinking about adding him to his staff. I would have to imagine that's a head of recruiting type staff at in some respect or another. Has a ton of connections all over the country with high school football, so I definitely think that would be a great hire if they can pull him in, and I think that would be a little bit more of a recruiting hire than a actual coaching hire, but he knows plenty of football. There's no doubt about that, so maybe it'll be a little bit more of a hybrid position, and definitely will be something to watch. I really don't know, Anthony. I don't know enough about that to really get into the details of that, and I don't know the contract details behind the scenes. Now, I do know it's $10 million if he wants to get out before June 1st of this year, so that's definitely something to think about. We'll go back and forth and see what happens there, but I don't know the details of that. I don't know if North Carolina would have any standing, really, because I think Bill Belichick gave himself plenty of outs in this contract, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how that develops and when he does get hired in the NFL, because I fully expect him to at some point in the next couple of years. What does that look like, and the fallout of that will be downright fascinating to watch. I can promise you that. And then a couple of guys from the NFL making their way down. Hugh Jackson has been hired as the OC at Georgia State. Really, really good head coach, and a head coach in the NFL level. Had some struggles at different times, had some different things happen, but overall was a coach that had a lot of success in the NFL, and definitely a guy that will add a little bit of flavor to the college football world. It also is something to think about. College football is becoming more and more palatable to NFL coaches. We will see more of this. We will see more veteran head coaches come down to be offensive coordinators, to be assistants, to be whatever on these college staffs, because they have a little bit more ability to navigate a a salary cap, different things that they will have to navigate over the next couple of years. Hugh Jackson obviously knows what that works like, and Georgia State will at least have someone from the NFL level to help them out with that. And then Ryan Grubb, he was fired at Seattle. From the Seahawks, He was fired from the Seahawks as their offensive coordinator. Had a great year throwing the football up there in Seattle. Had a very bad year running the football, and that was kind of the story, and that was the reason that he was let go. Now the speculation has started. Will he go back to Alabama? Will he stay in the NFL? I think there's a very interesting position for him here in Atlanta, where I am, because the pass game coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons moved on to be the OC at Indiana. Maybe Ryan Grubb reunites with Michael Penix over there in Atlanta. That would be a very interesting thing. But overall, I think there's a lot of different things that could unfold. And Anthony, you just said it. That would be the big thing that could unfold. Bill Belichick taking that job over at the Raiders would be absolutely insane, but absolutely something that I could see happening. It's just one of those things where you hire Bill Belichick, you are never going to hear the end of it from the NFL. You are never going to hear the end of rumors from the NFL. Wes Goodwin is another guy I want you guys to be on the lookout for. He was fired as the defensive coordinator over at Clemson. Been a very weird year. That talent level was just way too good for them to be playing that poorly. That's just the reality of the situation. Was a coach that did a very, very good job early on, was elevated when Brent Venables moved on. Just hasn't been the years that they've wanted it on the defensive side of the ball. So where are they moving forward to? Well, it might just be the guy that we just saw move on to the national title. It sounds like Al Golden might be the front runner for this job right about now. It was Tim Banks for a couple of days. That has fallen out. Al Golden is someone to watch, and you could see here a lot of different chatter between now and the national championship. That's kind of how these coaching searches work, where if a guy is going deep into the thing, they will get those interviews in. They will have something kind of in writing before the championship, and then they'll sign it right after. That's kind of just how that thing goes down. And if it's Al Golden, that's a fantastic hire. I'd be a little bit surprised if I'm being honest, but there's a couple other guys. Bryant Haynes over at Indiana is another option. Tyler Santucci at Georgia Tech, we've talked about a lot, is a big name on the market right now. So there's some defensive coordinator jobs that are still very much wide open, and some really great names that are being flied around for a lot of those positions. Al Golden might be the very best among them. And then just a feel-good story here. Grayson McCall has been hired at Coastal Carolina as an offensive analyst. I just love this. He was a legend at that school, did an incredible job kind of building Coastal Carolina up to a team that you really wanted to watch every single Saturday. And now he is officially back on campus, is going to be a coach, and frankly, I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's a guy that is going to be a head coach in college football, and that sounds like a very, very aggressive call to make. I'm not arguing that at all, but at the end of the day, I really do believe Grayson McCall is going to be a head coach in college football at some point. I think he's going to be around for a very, very long time. Very smart quarterback, has tons of leadership qualities. Every coach he's played for has just loved that kid, and I think it's going to be incredible to see what happens going forward. Wouldn't that be funny, Anthony, if Al Golden just found his way right back down to Coral Gables? I'd be a little bit surprised, if I'm being honest, but overall, it's one of those things where if Miami comes with the right offer and Al Golden feels the right type of way, it very well could happen, and I think it would be a great hire, as crazy as that sounds now for a lot of Hurricanes fans. But overall, remarkable stuff, and you look at the coaching carousel, it's going to be weird. Bill Belichick could make his way up to the NFL. Matt Campbell is one that I don't know if it was on here or not, and I just totally missed it, but he might be making his way to the NFL, is interviewing with the Bears, and then a couple of guys coming down from the NFL to college is a real reality. So there's a lot of different things that could happen with this one. Ryan Grubb could stay on the West Coast and do something over there. It's going to be awesome to watch what this coaching carousel looks like, and frankly could have a lot of implications for what this looks like next year. And then just some final words on the Cotton Bowl is this is going to be awesome. The talent level on this field is going to be probably the best that we've seen in 2 or 3 years in college football. I'll be honest. These guys are absolute difference makers on both sides of the football. You have 2 freshmen that very well could have gone in the first round this year if they were eligible to be drafted, in Jeremiah Smith and Colin Simmons. You have guys all over the field that are going to be drafted in the first round, in the second round, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, and 7th. And a couple other guys that are going to go undrafted free agents. These guys are absolute difference makers. You have 2 quarterbacks that haven't been much maligned throughout his time. You know, Quinn Ewers trying to shut up a lot of people and tell people that he is unequivocally better than Arch Manning and can lead them to a national title. Ohio State and Ryan Day just trying to continue that march to the national title, and we'll see if Texas will go down with the fight or we'll roll over, kind of the way that Oregon and Tennessee did. But it's going to be awesome. I can't make promises. I can't say that Texas isn't going to get rolled in this game. I can't say it's not going to look like the Rose Bowl. What I can say is I just got a feeling about this one. I just got a weird feeling about this one that this thing is going to fall into place, and we're going to have an incredible, incredible game in this one. But quick question from Anthony before we get out of here. Does Ryan Grubb come from the same coaching tree as Kalen DeBoer? I don't know the answer to that. I'll be totally honest with you. I believe they come from the same coaching tree. I believe they've kind of come up together. I believe Ryan Grubb was the quarterback coach at Indiana. I've gotten all kind of lost in a lot of these different coaching market things. But overall, I don't know. I don't know if he'd want to stay more out on the West Coast. I don't know if he'd be willing to follow Kalen DeBoer over to Bama or some other option in the NFL. I tend to believe the NFL might be the landing spot, but obviously something that we can talk about in time, and definitely he will have a job here pretty soon. We saw him at Washington. He is not going to be on the market for much, much longer. I can promise you that. But overall, it's going to be awesome tonight. Enjoy it. It was an incredible game last night. Hopefully we get a little bit of an encore tonight, and then we just got one game left in the college football season. So enjoy this one as much as you can. It is ending relatively soon, but we will be back on Monday to review that game, to review the Notre Dame game just a little bit more. Didn't get fully into that one the way that I wanted to. We'll preview the national championship. We'll do all of it on Monday. So thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We got great people covering every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. I'll be back on Monday to break down what I hope is an incredible game today, and I very much hope I don't lose power for it, but regardless, I will see you here on Monday to break everything down, and I'll see you then.